Live from the Poly Market studio in LA. It's the Young Turks.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. It's good to be back in the studio to do my first in-studio solo show since I came back from break and the DNC. We've got a giant show for you today. Lots of breaking news. We're gonna talk about the DOJ's indictment of two Russian individuals who they claim were spreading disinformation on behalf of Russia. Now, these are obviously indictments. This is a case that needs to be proven, but I'm gonna give you all of the details as we have them at the moment. And there are some big names who are tied up in this big alleged scandal. So stick around for the details on that. We're gonna start the show with that story. Later, we're also gonna discuss the UK's decision to suspend weapons shipments to Israel. How much of a difference is that going to make over Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? We're gonna get into that. My favorite part of that story is the US's ridiculous response to the UK, so stick around for that detail. In the second hour, John Iadarola will be joining me. We're gonna talk about a whole host of topics. We're gonna discuss the current presidential race and the polling associated with it. It's still a tight race, still pretty much tied, to be honest with you. But it really does come down to a few battleground states. And so we're gonna discuss where both Harris and Trump land in those critical battleground states. And then later in the show, hopefully, if we have time, we're gonna talk about all the different people and all the different things that Donald Trump has referred to as beautiful. Not something that you would think Trump would be associated with, but he does love to call things beautiful. So we're gonna get to that and have some fun with Trump's signature speaking style. But as always, I just want to encourage you all to like and share the stream. If you're watching us live, it's a great way to share our message. You can also help by becoming a member, tyt.com/join to become a member, or just smash that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. And send in your super chats, guys. Send in your comments if you're a member. I'll read them during our social breaks. Now, without further ado, let's get to our first story having to do with the DOJ and allegations over Russian state media. Today, the Department of Justice charged two Russian state media employees with allegedly infiltrating an American digital media company and allegedly manipulating its content and the output of the company. Now, even though the DOJ did not reveal the name of this US-based media company, it is suspected that they're talking about Tenet Media. And some of the talent associated with Tenet Media has kind of come out on social media to kind of confirm this. So we'll get to those details in just a moment. But first, we do need to give you some more details on what these allegations entail. So the DOJ's press release on the charges claimed that two Russian employees were from the Russian media outlet called Russia Today, or RT, and they used fake personas in order to get hired at this American-based media company. They then allegedly worked from within this company to amplify pro-Russian narratives and attempt to stoke divisions among Americans. Now, the company's two founders also both allegedly have ties to RT and were involved in this whole scheme. I wanna just stop for a moment and make sure we're all on the same page. These are indictments. The DOJ is making allegations. Obviously, they need to prove what they are alleging, but these allegations have specific names tied to them and very specific methods in which they allegedly tried to infiltrate the American media to spread disinformation on behalf of the Russian government. So the indictment features a woman by the name of Elena, or Elena, I should say. Elena, I'm gonna do my best with her last name, Afanasieva. one of the undercover Russian employees, allegedly, that was charged in this indictment. So let's go to the DOJ's press release on this and what they are claiming. So after the March 22nd, 2024 terrorist attack on a music venue in Moscow, she asked one of US Company One's founders to blame Ukraine and the United States for the attack, writing, quote, "I think we can focus on the Ukraine-US angle. The mainstream media spread fake news that ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack, yet ISIS itself never made such statements. All terrorists are now detained while they were heading to the border with Ukraine, which makes it even more suspicious. Why would they want to go to Ukraine to hide?" Now, the terrorist attack that she was referring to was a terrorist attack that was carried out by ISIS. ISIS did take full responsibility for it. So this allegation that they didn't was ridiculous. In fact, CNN, which reported on the story at the time, said that ISIS had claimed responsibility for an attack at a popular concert hall complex near Moscow after assailants stormed the venue with guns and incendiary devices, killing 60 people and injuring 145. The terror group took responsibility for the attack in a short statement published by ISIS-affiliated news agency Amaq on Telegram. Now, allegedly, RT also funneled a huge amount of money to this American company. Again, the speculation is that the American company is Tenet Media. And I also should just note that RT obviously is funded by the Russian government. So Russian government funds RT, and according to the DOJ, RT then took a certain sum and then funneled it to Tenet Media. So between in or about October 2023 and in or about August 2024, RT sent wire transfers to US Company One totaling approximately $9.7 million, which represented nearly 90% of this company's bank deposits from all sources combined. So Tenet Media, according to these allegations by the Department of Justice, was nearly completely funded by the Russian government. Now, there's more. So the two Russian employees in this indictment have been charged with conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison, and conspiracy to commit money laundering, which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. So what's different in this allegation compared to Russia-based allegations that we've heard from our government in the past is that this is a lot more specific. It names two specific individuals. It talks about how this scheme allegedly worked. It gives you a specific amount of money that the Russian government allegedly funneled to Tenet Media. And apparently the Department of Justice's statement, press release, and press conference about this was so detailed that some of the American-based talent who are associated with Tenet Media felt the need to come forward and essentially defend themselves and say, yeah, we worked for Tenet Media, but we were unwittingly spreading Russian propaganda. We're gonna get to that in just a moment, so hold on. So as for what the American company involved in this scheme is gonna deal with, so far we can only speculate, but we do have some clues again that it was Tenet Media. And that's because the DOJ press release gave us some clues. We got some hints, right? They said that the company is based in Tennessee. Tenet Media is based in Tennessee. In the business of posting commentary videos to social media, that's not really much of a hint. A lot of different media organizations do that. And identifies 6 commentators as talent on its website. So this is where things start to get a little juicy. And so, well, a company called Tenet Media checks all of those boxes. And here's the talent at the company. You have, a lot of right-wing voices, Lauren Southern, Tim Pool. I'm not familiar with Taylor Hansen, Matt Christensen, Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson. All of these individuals have been working as talent for Tenet Media. And Tim Pool, to his credit, has responded to these allegations. He did not respond in a way that I expected him to respond. I thought that he was gonna just lose it and deny everything and say that this is just another attempt to go after Donald Trump and hurt his chances of getting elected. But no, he didn't do that, again, to his credit. So let's actually go to what he did say. This is what he posted on X. Should these allegations prove true, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived and are victims. I cannot speak for anyone else at the company as to what they do or to what they are instructed. The Culture War podcast was licensed by Tenet Media. It existed well before any license agreement with Tenet, and it will continue to exist after any such agreement expires. The only change with the agreement was that the location of the live broadcast moved to Tenet's YouTube channel. He also refers to Putin as a scumbag and says that Russia sucks donkey balls. So you've got that. But he also goes on to say that Tenet Media had no editorial control over the content that he puts out as part of the Culture War podcast. So there wasn't this effort to essentially right off the bat claim that the DOJ is making things up, and I really respect the fact that Tim Pool did not do that. And he goes on to, again, say that, look, this is what's being alleged, it needs to be proven in court. I agree with him on that. And I do also appreciate that in this particular case, the DOJ is being very specific about what the allegations are, naming very specific people, calling out a specific sum of money that was allegedly funneled from the Russian government to Tenet Media. It's different from the Hunter Biden laptop story is a Russian disinformation campaign, right? I feel stupid to have bought that back in 2020. That ended up being a complete and utter lie, and that was a hoax. But in this case, it seems like there could be some real meat on the bones when it comes to the allegation. And look, to be clear, we should not be okay with any foreign government having any influence over our media, over our politicians. And it is kind of interesting to see where our federal government likes to focus its attention, right? So if you have a massive lobbying group that represents a foreign government, like AIPAC representing Israel, well, is anyone gonna argue that AIPAC doesn't have a tremendous amount of influence over our political system, over our media? I mean, just think about that for a second. Now, some might argue, no, but it's okay because the way AIPAC does it is legal. Well, AIPAC doesn't have to register as a foreign agent because of how our organizations are funded, how money in politics works. There's a lot of dark money pouring in, so it's incredibly difficult to engage in oversight. But if anyone is under the impression that it's only Russia that's trying to have an influence over our elections or over our political discourse here in the United States, I mean, I've got a bridge to sell you. So, dealing with Russia is one thing, and I have no problem with it if there is clear evidence and it's easy for the DOJ to actually prosecute this case with evidence on its side. But picking and choosing which foreign government gets to have influence over our political system, I think is a little questionable to say the least. And I also want to note that the Fed has taken other actions against alleged Russian interference in our media and our elections. According to the New York Times, the Treasury Department has apparently sanctioned Anno Dialogue, a Russian nonprofit that helps run the Doppelganger Network. So the disinformation network, the feds have dubbed the Doppelganger Network, as well as the editor-in-chief of RT. Her name is Margarita Simonian, and her deputies. The State Department has also offered $10 million as a reward for any information pertaining to foreign interference in an American election and sanctioned 5 Russian state-funded news outlets, including RT, Ruptly, and Sputnik. So the one thing that I will say is, look, disinformation, especially disinformation that's being spread within the United States by a foreign actor, is a problem. But I also worry about kind of giving the federal government a lot of leeway in going after media organizations that it suspects of having some sort of foreign influence, right? So think about all of the different media organizations that air or operate here in the United States that are funded by a foreign government, right? Al Jazeera is a good example. Al Jazeera does some excellent journalism. But what if the federal government decides that Al Jazeera's coverage of Israel and its endless war with Palestinians isn't really to our liking? It sows division in America. Like, is the DOJ gonna get involved in trying to indict or silence people associated with Al Jazeera, which of course is funded by the Qatari government? And so there could be a door open here that I feel a little bit uncomfortable with, and I just think that we should proceed with caution and just be a little bit more skeptical of the federal government going after media organizations, and they have to prove their case. And so we'll see what happens with these latest indictments and these latest allegations by the DOJ. I'm curious to see how it plays out. But again, just based on Tim Pool's reaction to it, it seems like there's really some meat on the bones here. And if that's the case, I'm sure the DOJ will move forward with the prosecution, and we'll see how it plays out. All right, for now though, let's move on to something entirely different. Let's talk about pretty explosive decision by UK.
The government has suspended 30 of the UK's 350 arms export licenses to Israel. It's a decision that the chief rabbi says beggars belief and will encourage our shared enemies.
This is a serious issue. We either comply with international law or we don't. And we only have strength in our arguments because we comply with international law. I appreciate the party opposite didn't think that international law mattered, and that's why we got into the pickle that we did.
Well, the United States is now attempting to pressure the British government to continue all weapons shipments to Israel, despite the international community's fears that said weapons are being used to carry out human rights abuses and violations of international law. Now, before we get to the details of how the US has responded to the UK's decision to suspend some weapons to Israel, we should talk about what weapons are going to be suspended and how much of an impact this would have on Israel's ongoing war against Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Now, earlier this week, Britain did announce that they would immediately suspend shipments of 30 out of 350 export licenses to Israel for items used on the war on Gaza. Obviously, this is a tiny fraction of what the UK is sending to Israel to support what the IDF is currently carrying out in Gaza. But when you take a look at the amount of weapons that UK accounts for in Israel, you'll kind of get a sense that this isn't really going to make much of a difference. Nonetheless, the US is obviously panicking about it. Israel is furious about it. We're going to get to everyone's statements in just a moment. But this suspension includes sales of components for some military aircraft, such as fighter planes, helicopters, drones. They're also suspending some items used for ground targeting. So why is the UK doing this? Like, where is this coming from? Why did they make this decision? Well, Foreign Secretary David Lammy said the assessment found a clear risk that the exported items, quote, might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. What's really telling about this story, by the way, is the acceptance among players in the international community that Israel is carrying out violations of international law, while the United States keeps denying it. So you're gonna get a taste of that as I keep presenting the details of this story. So in response to this, Benjamin Netanyahu declared that the decision was shameful and only emboldens Hamas. Yeah, the guy who facilitated financial payments to Hamas has something to say about what emboldens Hamas. Okay, sure. He also says, with or without British arms, Israel will win this war and secure our common future. Well, it's easy to say that when the UK accounts for a minuscule percentage of Israel's weaponry. And even though, like, if they didn't halt any or suspend any of the weapon shipments to Israel, it would still account for a minuscule percentage of Israel's weapons. But they decided to take a minuscule percentage of that minuscule percentage and halt those weapons, which again, I don't think is really gonna have much of a difference. It sends a statement, it sends a message that the UK is a little bit uneasy with how the IDF is prosecuting this war. But in terms of real tangible impact on Israel's ability to continue doing what it's doing, I think it's minimal, to say the least. Now, Amnesty International agrees with me, and Greg Hands, who is the Minister of State for Trade Policy under the previous government, told Parliament that Britain's exports account for 0.02% of Israel's overall military imports. So as a result, I mean, Amnesty International just calls a spade a spade. They criticize the UK's decision as too limited. So is that going to have any weight over Israel's decision? The UK's decision to maybe increase the amount of weapons that they're willing to suspend? Probably not, but I do think it's telling that Amnesty International is like, this isn't really going to make much of a difference. Now, even though the UK is suspending a fraction of Israel's weapons shipments to Israel, which will again have very little impact on how they're carrying out this war, the US is already getting involved and pressuring the UK to essentially reverse their decision here. And how are they doing it? Okay, get ready to laugh. The US had privately warned Britain against suspending arms sales amid concerns it could damage attempts to broker a ceasefire. I'm just gonna let that ridiculous statement sink in. You wanna know who stands in the way of a ceasefire agreement? Benjamin Netanyahu. The guy who agreed to a ceasefire deal that was outlined by Biden and said, I agree to it. Now let's see what Hamas does. Hamas agrees to it, even though the provisions in that ceasefire deal made clear that there would not be a permanent ceasefire. Hamas agreed to that. And then Netanyahu took it and said, I'm gonna add some more provisions to it. Israel wants full control of the Philadelphia corridor, which makes it so clear this is not someone who's actually interested in a ceasefire. So if the US is concerned about a ceasefire deal, maybe they should have a long, hard talk with Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been the #1 obstacle to that. #1 obstacle. He doesn't want the war to end. The people of Israel know it, which is why you have mass protests going down in Israel. The American people who are paying close attention know it. Only those who have bought into the propaganda or have been funded by AIPAC genuinely think that the only thing standing in the way of a ceasefire deal is Hamas or some other BS reason. The idea that the UK halting a minuscule percentage of their weapons shipments to Israel is gonna stand in the way of a ceasefire deal is laughable to say the least. But look at the US throwing its weight around, telling the UK what to do. It is unbelievable to me, but let me continue. A senior government source said, the government had been poised to make the announcement earlier, but faced private interventions from Israel and the United States. Quote, the Americans were always going to be difficult, even if the Israelis were far more angry, the source said. But they joined together, announcing it would hurt the ceasefire deal, which no one is buying unless they're absolute suckers. Okay. So the US State Department spokesperson, Matt Miller, always a total joy and pleasure to hear from, was confronted about this, okay? And I love the way that this reporter framed the question, because the question here is, how could the US reach such a different decision from its closest allies as it pertains to Israel and how it is carrying out this war? Take a look.
You're trying to, I think, distinguish this, saying like this is our law, this is their law, but effectively the battlefield that you're looking at is the same battlefield, and we're all trying to get at that. We're just trying to wrap our heads around how two countries with pretty similar values, by the way, are looking at the same battlefield and coming with very different conclusions.
We are looking at the same battlefield. Have not reached conclusions. I think number one, it is important to say we have reviews that are ongoing, and we haven't made any final determinations or any final conclusions yet. Number two, there is a standard in the UK law. I will butcher it if I try to speak to that standard, but there's a standard that relates to the risk, I think it is.
But there's a standard in the US.
I know, and it is a different standard, and so they make their determinations based on the standard that is written in UK law. We will make our determinations based on the standard based in US law.
Okay, we also have laws about our weapons not being used by foreign governments to carry out human rights abuses or violations of international law. We also have those types of laws here in the United States. The UK and the US, both governments, taking a look at the exact same war. And I think that reporter's question was absolutely right. How is it that the UK could look at how this war is being carried out and say that they are fearful that their weapons are being used to carry out violations of international law, human rights abuses, while the US doesn't see the same thing. No idea what's going on. It really does show you, by the way, that the Biden administration never once even considered using our weapons as leverage to get Israel to rein in the slaughter of innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip, and now obviously the West Bank. I mean, the war has now spread to the West Bank, right? People had been forced out of their homes by Israeli settlers / terrorists. The IDF standing by, letting it happen. The Israeli government standing by, letting it happen. And now they're doing bombings in the West Bank. And some governments are like, yeah, I don't know if we really want to aid and abet this. And the UK isn't the only government, even though I guess some action is better than no action. I mean, I live in America with a government that refuses to halt any weapons shipments to Israel, regardless of what Israel does, okay? So I really don't have any room to talk when I take a look at our government. But you look at the UK, and I mean, they did a tiny amount here. Other governments have gone further, and I want to talk about that. So let's take a look at Italy, for instance, because last year Italy announced that they had stopped sending weapons to Israel. The government said that it was honoring existing orders on the condition that the weapons would not be used against civilians, according to Reuters. How does Italy, like these are Western allies, how do our Western allies look at the same war and decide, yeah, we don't really want to send weapons for Israel and the war that they're prosecuting, the way they're prosecuting it. We're not into that. But the US is like, you can't do this. It's standing in the way of a ceasefire deal. Total joke. You have the Netherlands. The courts in the Netherlands actually ordered the Dutch government to suspend exports for parts for F-35 fighters to Israel. And apparently the government is not in favor of what the courts decided there. So they're going to challenge this. They're going to appeal this decision to the highest court in the Netherlands. So we'll see how that plays out. Because of evident risks of serious violations of international humanitarian law in response to a lawsuit brought by Oxfam Novib and 2 other human rights groups. Okay, that was the decision that the courts in the Netherlands decided on. But then again, the Dutch government plans on appealing that. We'll see how that plays out. You have Belgium. They suspended 2 licenses for gunpowder exports to Israel following the ICJ's order directing Israel to do more to prevent civilian deaths, which clearly they haven't done. And Canada has also halted weapon shipments to Israel as well. But the US continues to arm Israel heavily despite violations of international laws and human rights abuses. The United States has supplied security assistance worth $6.5 billion to Israel since October 7th, according to the Washington Post back in June. It is the top supplier to the Israeli military, accounting for a whopping 69% of its total arms imports between the years of 2019 and 2023. And so, sure, it sends a message to have one of our closest allies, the UK, suspend some weapons to Israel. But at the end of the day, if we're talking about which governments are aiding and abetting Israel and how it's carrying out this war, really front and center you have the United States. You have our weapons manufacturers getting rich off of this. And my favorite thing, my favorite statement and talking point from members of the Israeli government is, why are these Americans complaining about how they're funding our war? Don't they understand that we have to spend some of that money on their defense contractors and their weapons manufacturers? No, that doesn't make us happy. Okay, that's not something that benefits the American people. It benefits a small group of already incredibly fabulously wealthy individuals who profit off of war. That doesn't do anything for ordinary Americans whose taxes are essentially funneled to that very small group of very wealthy people through this war that's going on in Gaza, which of course, I mean, the money is one thing, okay? The money obviously infuriates me, but that comes second to the absolute brutality and slaughter of women, children, and innocent people in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. That's the real injustice here. And I just want to make clear that our allies allies in the international community see it clearly, and the US government will bully them and ensure that they don't see it clearly. But hopefully the UK stays true to what they decided here, and maybe they widen that list of weapons that they suspend to Israel. We'll see. But the longer this war goes on, I don't think Netanyahu realizes. I get that he's continuing this war for his own political reasons. He wants to stay in power. The longer the war goes on, the longer he can stay in power, the longer he can skirt any responsibility for the corruption charges he's facing. But what he's doing is destroying Israel. Not just the Palestinians, not just Gaza, not just the West Bank. It is destroying Israel. But he doesn't care. Didn't care about the hostages, didn't even care to keep his own people safe on October 7th. Funded Hamas, facilitated the money being funneled from Qatar to Hamas, and then turns around and cries about the monster he partly helped create. All right. Anyway, we gotta take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about where Kamala Harris and Donald Trump stand in the presidential race. New polling is out, and I wanna share it with you. Don't miss it. Gotta Glow 100 just purchased a TYT membership. Thank you for supporting the show. You're gonna have a lot of fun with us in the bonus episode today, so definitely stick around for that after the main show. Jay, the okayest mailman, says, grab hold of them sweet hams, it's Anna hour. Thank you for that. 36 Chambers Dragon says, time to drop the hammer of justice and reason. It's Anna solo hour. Thank you. I'm really happy that some of you at least do enjoy Anna solo hour. Let's go to Uriah Heep, who says, and yet another mass shooting today led me to see that our nation has such a violent past, it frames the nation's narrative on Palestine, whether we want this or not. Yes, there was another school shooting today. It took place in Georgia. 4 individuals are unfortunately dead. Hundreds of others are reported injured. 2 were students. 2 of the victims who passed were students, and then 2 of the other victims were teachers. And the shooter was a 14-year-old boy. So just absolutely horrific story. Jenks Left Tricep of Fury says, so Russia and AIPAC control our media and politicians. This is surreal. I mean, it's, again, like the reason why I brought up AIPAC is this weird, like, double standard is really fascinating to me. I think that we should be principled and we shouldn't allow any foreign government to have any influence over our politicians or our media. And by the way, look, we have media that operates here in the United States that has ties to or is funded by a foreign government. As long as that information is clearly disclosed, then I think that's fine. Americans are gonna be, look, I actually have a lot more trust and faith in Americans than I think our government does to some extent. But you have to be upfront and clear about where the funding is coming from. And so I think most Americans know Al Jazeera, for instance, is funded by the Qatari government. So there's gonna be a bias there to some extent. Again, when it's done secretly, when there isn't transparency, I think that ends up being a huge problem. Let's go to Tipper Ray Dragon, who says, to be fair, Anna, it took the current genocidal wave for the world to look at Palestine as human. We in the Western world will reap the rewards of this inaction in about 10 years. When the current Palestinian youths grow up radicalized, we have learned nothing. I am worried about that, yeah. There was an excellent op-ed written in Haaretz by a former member of the Israeli military, and he just talks about how this war is destroying Israel. And he talks about how IDF soldiers have already gone on multiple, deployments to Gaza. And a lot of them are starting to have a huge problem with what's happening in Gaza, and more of them are starting to engage in protest. They're refusing to go fight in Gaza, and I want to hear more from those individuals. All right, I'll read some super chats and more when we come back. I'll see you in a bit. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Just want to read a few super chats. Actually, I'm going to start off with Stinky Feet in our super chats, who says, everyone watch Cenk on the totally nonpartisan, totally not in the tank for Trump Piers Morgan panel. He called Piers out and it was satisfying. So Cenk loses his cool a little too much for my taste on those panels, but I'm sure a lot of our audience members will love it because what he's saying is true. It's just that he's like letting other panel members get under his skin, and I wish he didn't do that. But I will say this. I think Piers Morgan and his producers retaliate against Cenk by finding the absolute worst still shot of him to use in their thumbnail. Like, just awful. Come on. Anyway, let's go to another name who says, interesting juxtaposition with Lex Friedman interviews lately, from Cenk to Trump. When's Anna Kasparian going to be interviewed? Okay, so I actually really love Lex Friedman and his style of interviewing people. I know some people would rather him be a little more combative. I don't know, I'm just in this phase right now where I want to hear what people have to say. And if someone says something untrue, yeah, of course I want Lex Friedman to immediately correct what they're saying. Although that's sometimes difficult to do in real time. But anyway, if you've ever watched or listened to any of his interviews, he's very calm. And for some reason, that just really appeals to me these days. All right, I'll read more comments later. Actually, another name writes in and says, I really like the tempo and tone of Anna Solo. It's clear she doesn't require a co-host, and it also lets her style and opinion fully shine through. And yes, her outfit looks nice. Thank you for all of that. That was very, very sweet. I like having a co-host, but you know, the 1 hour a week solo is nice. It's a nice change of pace. Okay, let's get to our next story.
New CNN polling released just this morning shows a race that is truly neck and neck among likely voters in key battleground states. Harris holds a lead over Trump in Wisconsin and Michigan. In Arizona, Trump holds the lead. In nearby Nevada, there's no clear leader. And in what are arguably the two most critical states, well, it's a tie. There is no clear leader in Georgia, and it is dead even in the must-win state of Pennsylvania.
Well, despite the ascendancy of Kamala Harris and despite Donald Trump's insistence on essentially sabotaging himself at every chance he gets, the 2024 presidential race, as it stands today, is still a ridiculously close race. Nothing makes that clearer than the polls that keep coming out. Nothing makes that clearer than what the polls say about these critical battleground states. And for now, it appears to be anyone's game, and there are only 62 days until Election Day. So the candidates aren't in agreement on the state of the race, which is kind of funny. Now, Harris is openly acknowledging that it's going to be a close call, while Trump is, well, why don't you see for yourselves?
I can't believe that that's going to be a close election. You know, we're leading in the polls, and it looks close, but I think in the end, it's not going to be a close election.
We are the underdog in this race. And we have some hard work then ahead of us. But here's the beauty of us in this room. We like hard work. Hard work is good work.
So, the last several presidential races have been pretty close. So Trump saying, I can't believe this is a close election, is kind of funny to me because presidential elections seem to be closer and closer. I mean, the polling leading up to the 2016 election, if you were focused on the national polling, which I think is always a mistake, then you would think, oh, I mean, Hillary Clinton's gonna beat Trump easy, no problem. But it always comes down to the battleground states. Like those are the states that really decide the election. And so let's talk a little bit about that because CNN's poll specifically studied 6 battleground states. But there are 2 in particular, which you heard earlier, that will be especially important for the race to 270 electoral college votes. So here's more on that.
We have talked so much about that blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And as you noted here, we're seeing Harris with slight leads in Michigan and Wisconsin. And so instead of our focus for the next 62 days just being on those blue wall states, I really think you got to go down the side of the East Coast. That Pennsylvania, Georgia, we'll see. We don't have North Carolina in this set of polling. If that is acting like Georgia, those states may be the ones to determine. And it's because, as you noted, Donald Trump has to have everything, just hold everything he had in 20, flip Pennsylvania and Georgia, he's the president again. And so if Harris can win one of those states, that's a huge block that she puts up in the path for Donald Trump and sets her potentially on a course.
Oh, it's too close. Like I wouldn't bet on this election at this moment. And I know that there's a lot more excitement on the Democratic side of things now that Kamala Harris is the nominee rather than Joe Biden. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is gonna be a cakewalk. And I'm happy that Harris realizes that. I'm happy that she still sees herself as the underdog because I do think that Donald Trump, despite what Democratic voters might believe, is a formidable opponent. You know, if you're a Democratic voter, you're a hardcore partisan, you look at Donald Trump and of course, to you, it's easy to underestimate him. I would say it's a massive, massive weakness to underestimate your political opponent because the race, again, always comes down to the swing voters, independent voters, people who are not hardcore partisans, who are not loyal to one party or the other. These are individuals who can be swayed. And so when you think about the issues that are top of mind for American voters, and particularly these swing voters, they're concerned about the economy, they're concerned about immigration, and you should look at how they feel about Harris and Trump, how much they trust these 2 individuals on those critical matters. And so let's talk about that, okay? On average, 15% of voters in these 6 swing states say that CNN polled, of course, say that they have not decided on who they're gonna vote for, just 15%. So that 15% of undecided voters in these 6 swing states, those are the individuals who are gonna decide the election, okay? And so those Americans have some strong feelings about very specific issues and who they trust more to tackle those issues. Economic issues, which posed a notable weak point for Biden, remain the topic most often chosen by voters when asked what matters to their choice for president. An average of 39% of likely voters across states choose the economy as their top issue, with protecting democracy next at an average of 25%. I think that that's telling because it shows you why Biden's one and only strategy to win re-election was so ineffective. I mean, the only messaging we really got from the Biden campaign was, we gotta save democracy. Well, if saving democracy isn't the most important issue to these swing voters or to voters in general, probably because they're not buying the notion that Trump is a threat to democracy, whether you agree with that or not, that's what they're feeling. Well, get off message and talk about something that actually does matter to them. And clearly the economy is top of mind. Harris, by the way, now trails Trump on trust to handle the economy by relatively smaller margins than Biden did. So that's good news. Across the current polls, Trump is more trusted than Harris on the economy by 8 points on average. And by the way, I think that Harris is doing her best to try to earn more trust among these voters when it comes to the economy. Later on in the show, we're gonna talk about her latest economic proposals and how they would benefit small businesses. She talked a little bit earlier about what she wants to do to help ordinary Americans or help Americans in buying a home. Now she's coming out with some proposals in regard to entrepreneurship and how to help spur small businesses in the United States. We'll get to that a little later. Now, in the New York Times Siena College polls of the 6 swing states, this spring. The same calculation, by the way, yielded a 20-point Trump advantage over Biden, really emphasizing here that Harris is closing that gap to some extent. Trump maintains a broad advantage as more trusted to handle immigration, which really shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, he has kind of taken ownership of that issue and has, I guess, stronger messaging on it. So voters think that he would tackle the issue a little better than Harris would as it stands today, but that could change. Harris has built on Biden's lead as more trusted to handle abortion and reproductive rights. I mean, I should hope so, with women across these 6 states preferring her by an average of 27 percentage points on the issue. By the way, Trump's wavering on that issue and the flip-flopping on that issue is pretty gross, because it really highlights how politicians see something that has a very real world impact on people's lives as nothing more than like a toy, a little prop to throw around. You know, just go along with what the polling is saying. Who cares? Who cares about the consequences for real human beings? So like, I don't know what Trump actually thinks about abortion. He just kind of goes with the flow and goes with what he thinks is gonna help him get elected. In the meantime, he's the man responsible for appointing the Supreme Court justices who aided and abetted the reversal of Roe. And that has led to a lot of pain, a lot of suffering for women and for families in some of these red states that effectively have abortion bans. So it's not a joke, it's not a game, and I think we should expect more from our politicians. When they use these issues that have an impact on our lives, a real impact on our lives, and our ability to have families, when we have families, when we decide to have children, I mean, they're showing us who they really are. It shows that it's all about themselves, it's all about their own personal power. It's not really about improving the lives of Americans. So I don't know what Trump is doing, right? Oh, I'm gonna vote in favor of the referendum in Florida that would set the abortion standards to what they were under Roe. Then he gets backlash from the right and says, never mind, I changed my mind. Okay, who are you and what do you represent? What are your principles? What are your values? Anyway, all right. So the swing state voters are also more likely to describe Trump as having clear policy plans to solve the country's problems, but also more likely to describe his views and policies as so extreme that they pose a threat to the country. All right, and then there's also a massive gender gap. I don't want to feed into this narrative because I don't want a battle of the sexes in the country, but the abortion issue has made gender and sex a big part of the electorate and their voting habits here, right? So let's talk about that. Here is more on how this is kind of turning into a men versus women issue and how men and women are likely to vote in this election as a result of issues like reproductive rights.
If you look at likely female voters across these states, you see enormous margins for Harris there. I mean, look, in Wisconsin, that's
55% is a landslide in our closely divided
politics. So she's
politics,
plus
right?
17, she's plus 16, she's plus 15. Those
David
are
Chalian
huge.
is doing math on live television, everybody. No, this is like an awesome feat. We love it.
But show the other side, because among likely male voters, it's big advantage Trump. This is what we mean by the gap. When we say gender gap, it's not just the advantage among female voters for a Democrat, it's the difference between the female voter advantage among Democrats and the male voter advantage among Republicans, and you see what a big advantage that is for Trump among male voters.
So look, it's important to keep in mind that women are still very much motivated to get out the vote because of the reversal of Roe, which I think is super, super interesting here. They are registering to vote in extremely high numbers. They're outpacing men in new voter registrations. So that is good news for Harris, but she still trails Biden, or how Biden was doing in support among people of color. And I'm talking about Biden from 2020, not how Biden was doing in this recent electoral process. So support for Harris has grown by 13 percentage points among black voters since Biden left the race in July. Combined results of journal polls in late July and August show She is still 10 points behind Biden's 2020 mark, though. Harris has also gained 13 points in Latino support, but lags behind Biden's 2020 mark by 6 points. Now, that could be because those voters feel that they're no longer represented by the Democratic Party, or that the Democratic Party hasn't really been listening to their concerns. But I have noticed a difference between Harris and Biden in how Harris is carrying out her campaigning. She isn't really distancing herself from Biden, but she is coming out with policy proposals that differ from Biden's, which I think is interesting. And she seems to be tackling the issues that voters are most concerned about head on, whereas Biden was nowhere to be seen. And that was a huge problem for Democrats in winning re-election. So we'll see how this plays out. Again, the race is still too close to call. I wouldn't bet any money on it, but you do have Harris, refusing to underestimate her opponent here. You have Trump wondering how the election could possibly be this close. You do have two very different candidates, but look, at the end of the day, we live in a very divided country, unfortunately, like divided partisan-wise, even though a lot of us agree on the same issues. And so it doesn't surprise me that the election is close. We'll see where it goes. But for now, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we've got more news for you. I just have to be choosy. I have to be picky on what we cover because we're running out of time. I don't want to cut into John Iadarolla's hour too much. We'll be right back. Welcome new members, Sammy B, Shining Kimmy, and BHT. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for becoming members. We really appreciate it. Great Eastern Sun in our members section says, and I know you'll tell us honestly, what are the actual odds of a ceasefire before the election? It's got to be Kamala's biggest hurdle with progressives. That I would bet money on, and I would bet it at 0%. Like there's no way that there's going to be a ceasefire because there's a huge obstacle in the way, and that obstacle is Benjamin Netanyahu, who, like any other human being, is motivated by incentives and disincentives. He knows that the Israeli public despises him. He knows that he faces prosecution over corruption charges the second he's out of office. So he will make this war drag on and potentially open up new fronts in this war in order to stay in power. That is what his incentive is. He has no incentive to engage in a ceasefire deal. You think he cares about the lives of Palestinians? He certainly doesn't care about that. But do you think he even cares about the lives of IDF soldiers? He doesn't care about any of that. Benjamin Netanyahu cares about Benjamin Netanyahu. He is a deplorable human being. He doesn't care about his actions and how his quest for power or remaining in power is carried out in the detriment of the Israeli people. Doesn't care about any of that. And I think Israelis have woken up to that. That's why they're taking to the streets, and I commend them for doing so. Let's go to Mr. Green, who says, I'm shocked. Well, not that shocked, and that's in regard to the DOJ indictments of 2 Russian individuals and the RT story. Let's go back to our super chat. Sir Ruin of House Roundhead says, if only Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu could be voted out now, I think they would lose in a landslide. I agree with you on that. I mean, again, if you look at how the Israeli public feels about Netanyahu, I mean, his approval ratings are in the gutter. He's just an awful human being. Anyway, let's keep going. Chris writes in and says, they can pressure the UK, but not Israel. What a joke. And that's in regard to the US pressuring the UK to continue sending all of the weapons they had been sending to Israel. Ian Hamilton says, evening UK viewer here, at least Starmer, that's Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, is doing something regarding Israel. Yes, that is true. I mean, look, even though it's not really gonna have a tangible effect on Israel and what it's currently doing in Gaza and the West Bank, it sends a message. And I do think that message from one of our closest allies is an important message to send. So I appreciate you writing in. I agree with you on that. And certainly it's more than what we're doing here in the US. We're not willing to even consider using the weapons that we sent to Israel as leverage to rein in what the extremists in the Israeli government are currently carrying out. All right, let's go back to the show. I'm out of time. The show is flying by today. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian with you. Let's get right to our next story.
But there's a false equivalency going on in the coverage of this race.
Their objectivity actually is not objective at all. It ends up playing to Donald Trump's advantage every day.
In an effort to appear balanced, to appear objective, mistakes are absolutely being made and standards are being applied to both candidates here when Donald Trump is a different animal. He is an insurrectionist.
Well, the crew over at Morning Joe on MSNBC, the same crew that wanted Biden to continue running in this presidential race despite the fact that he was suffering from clear cognitive decline. Yeah, those people, they're furious that journalists would have the audacity of ever reporting anything negative on the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, because Trump he's a special threat. And so since they've decided that Trump is a very special threat, well, then journalists should hide information about Kamala Harris from you so you don't vote for Trump and definitely vote for Kamala Harris. In other words, they want the media to manipulate you and do the exact opposite of journalism. Don't believe me? Well, why don't we hear co-host Mike Barnicle make his case?
But there's a false equivalency going on in the coverage of this race, in that Donald Trump can say whatever crazy things he wants to say about submarines and sharks and electric batteries, whatever he wants to say. And it's not really covered in the sense that it's covered describing who said it, why he said it, and who the man is, Trump, out of his mind. And always in that story, in the equivalency, the false equivalency by too many reporters and too many American newspapers, there's also, by the way, Kamala Harris changed her mind on fracking. They always throw in something like that in the coverage of the story. It's ridiculous. We don't cover the man for how dangerous he is.
You don't cover the man for how dangerous he is? I don't know. I don't know what country I'm living in, but I feel like we get wall-to-wall coverage about Trump being a danger to this country. It is incessant. It is all they talk about on MSNBC. Did he just suggest that journalists shouldn't report on Kamala Harris changing her mind on fracking? Is that not an important policy that voters should be informed about? And also, is he under the impression that telling Americans the truth about where Kamala Harris stands on the issues automatically means that Donald Trump is going to win the election? This is, when I started my career, when I started working at TYT back in 2007, there really wasn't like left-wing media. There was like Fox News, and the right-wing media infrastructure was kind of being built. And I prided myself and the left wing on the fact that we didn't try to manipulate audiences, and we didn't try to lie to people or cover up the truth about our preferred candidates or preferred politicians. We didn't want to stoop low and do what the right wing was doing with their misinformation, with the fact that they would omit incredibly relevant, important parts of the story in order to make Republicans look good and Democrats look bad. And now we're in this awful era of conditioning audiences and readers to expect journalists to cheerlead like partisan hacks for one candidate or the other. And if you don't do it, if you don't engage in it, they get mad at you. You're supposed to be my cheerleader. You're supposed to cheerlead for my preferred candidate. What are you doing? How dare you talk about Kamala Harris and how she went from being against fracking to now saying she's totally in favor of fracking? How dare you? The media doesn't fearmonger about Trump enough? Has he considered that maybe, just maybe, the media had been fearmongering about Trump so much, so often, that Americans have become desensitized to it? Has he considered that? Has he considered the fact that Joe Biden ran his campaign almost entirely on Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and it wasn't working? Why do you think it wasn't working? This is the most brain dead argument I have heard on MSNBC, and that is saying something, because there are a lot of brain dead arguments made on MSNBC. But we're about to hear more. So Joe Scarborough argues that journalists who are trying to be objective actually end up helping Trump. So maybe don't be objective. Let's watch.
Even Arlington, you've seen major newspaper outlets talk about, well, how will this impact Kamala Harris and the issue of Afghanistan after he goes? And he
does a thumbs up and pictures.
Well, and just acts like a brute and desecrates Arlington. That's not a time to say, well, how does it's? But again, we see it time and time again. For some reason, the mainstream media. What are we, 9 years in to Donald Trump's era in American politics, still doesn't know how to cover Donald Trump. Their objectivity actually is not objective at all. It ends up playing to Donald Trump's advantage.
Don't be objective because it plays to Donald Trump's advantage? Why? Because journalists want to answer a question about how Kamala Harris would handle Afghanistan, what her views on Afghanistan happen to be. Do the American voters have the right to know where Kamala Harris stands on those issues? Or should we be kept in the dark because Trump bad? Trump bad. That's what Joe Scarborough wants. He wants journalists to line up and say in unison over and over again, Trump bad, because that's been real effective, right? Listen, he wants to be a cheerleader for one side. That's great, go be a cheerleader for one side. But don't sit there on your boring ass morning show where you try to gaslight the American public about Biden's mental health and pass judgment on people who are trying to get Kamala Harris to answer questions on something amazing, policy, where she stands on policy. Because there are voters out there, believe it or not, who aren't partisan hacks. Those are the individuals who actually end up deciding elections, and they want to know where Kamala Harris stands on policy. Simply hearing Trump bad over and over again doesn't work for them. I think the American people deserve to know where both candidates stand on policies. Don't insult the intelligence of voters. And more importantly, please don't pressure journalists to suck at their jobs by being nothing more than partisan hacks like Joe Scarborough is, like Mika Brzezinski is. It is unbelievable to me. So look, turns out that some are taking this crappy advice already, as left-wing misinformation, unfortunately, is now part of our media landscape. And it's not something that I'm happy about, because a lot of these sources I used to trust, I used to believe they're reporting at face value. And then I came to the realization that they weren't telling the whole truth. They were admitting parts of the story. They were, in some cases, taking Trump out of context. And it was infuriating, because if you put Trump in context and you actually report the story accurately, I'm not gonna suddenly be a huge Trump fan. But I am gonna get angry when I find out that the sources that I trusted were intentionally taking him out of context to make him seem worse than he really is. So there was a piece out in the New York Times today that I think you should all read. And it was titled, "Left-wing misinformation is having a moment. America's right flank remains the chief purveyor of misinformation, but this summer's political tumult created ideal conditions for falsehoods to spread among progressives." So let's just quickly focus on the Trump assassination attempt, where Joy Reid, an MSNBC host with more than 340,000 followers on Threads, raised questions about Trump's injury from the shooting, doubts that some of her followers interpreted when his medical details were not released as implying a cover-up. Then you also had that Brooklyn Dad Defiant guy on X, who has more than 1.3 million followers. He amplified such suspicions by offering his own doubts about Trump's injury. Yeah, the FBI confirmed that Trump got shot in the ear. Okay, like it's confirmed by the FBI. Like, who are we? Really, we're gonna play this game where we engage in conspiracy theories? Like, on one hand, criticize the right wing for engaging in conspiracy theories as we engage in conspiracy theories? I think it's pretty gross. But as a result, more than 1/3 of President Biden's supporters believe the assassination attempt may have been staged, according to a poll in July by Morning Consult. There's other stuff. And like, I hesitate to even bring this up because people are hell-bent on being scared about Project 2025. But let me just be clear about something. There are all sorts of allegations about the Heritage Foundation's document, which again, they release every election cycle. This is the first time we have the Democratic Party specifically tying it to Donald Trump, because some of the people associated with the Heritage Foundation used to be in Trump's administration. Okay, does that mean that Trump is, you think Trump respects anyone who was in his administration? But okay, let's talk about the specific allegations that we've heard about what's in Project 2025, which is a 900-page document. The media knows that most Americans, they don't have the bandwidth to sit down and read a 900-page document. So they get to say whatever they want about it. They get to claim that it includes all sorts of things that it doesn't even actually say. So for instance, Vice President Harris said on July 23rd that Project 2025 called for cutting Social Security. It was not a one-time mistake. She also said at a July 11th, 2024 campaign event, Project 2025 includes a plan to cut Social Security. Well, NewsGuard, which does a pretty good job in fact-checking these types of claims on both sides, took a look and they found out that the Project 2025 policy playbook titled Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, does not even mention any proposed changes to Social Security. Okay, great. Left-leaning news outlet, thegrio.com, advanced the myth that Project 2025 proposes banning Muslims. The Mandate for Leadership includes no mention of a Muslim ban or any religion or ethnicity-specific entry ban. I'm not saying this to help Trump. I think Trump is plenty bad on his own, and there are factual attacks that you could use against Donald Trump to win the election. Making things up to scare Americans into voting for the Democratic candidate, all it does is lead to people feeling totally like disgusted with politics, because people eventually find out. And people are getting sick of the fear tactics. And what's amazing to me is that the people over there at Morning Joe desperately want journalists to engage in more scare tactics, to lie to audiences more, to lie to readers more, to essentially do political cheerleading for one party over the other. And whether it's done on behalf of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, I'm sick of it. You need real journalism, factual journalism, actual reporting in order to have a well-functioning democracy. Without it, we are hopeless. And so hopefully journalists don't listen to knuckleheads like Joe Scarborough and that other guy, Barnacle, whatever his name is. I mean, just, we don't like Trump, so we want you to lie on behalf of Kamala Harris or Biden or whoever. I mean, they've been outed as liars. Have they considered that maybe journalists don't want to embarrass themselves the way the crew over at Morning Joe has? They should think about it. We'll be back.
You would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one. You're not gonna be a dictator, are you? I said no, other than day one.
By locking up his enemies, by breaking all the rules, the courts, yeah, right. Them and what army?
This country needs a dictator. I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
It's the truth from the Young Turks. Americans saying they want a dictator?
I'd rather have Donald Trump as a dictator for 4 years. I'm going dictator Trump for sure.
How crazy will his supporters go?
I'm gonna be a dictator for one day.
This is the first presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade.
There's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. We have 1,000 trillionaires in America. If we finally beat Medicare.
Every poll is going the same direction. Against Biden, democracy's on the line. On behalf of the Democratic Party, I throw it in. Biden's done. If you go with this guy, guaranteed loss. Joe Biden is a disaster, and nobody's even listening to anything he's saying. Why is our only two choices, two people who are deeply disliked in this country, nearly hated? And if you're in Washington, I just broke your heart because I said Biden might be hated. He's at 38%. Learn math.
There is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices. Yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. For the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president.
We asked you guys to sign a petition that we started about 10 months ago. Everybody said it was impossible, but we just declared victory. We did it.
The TYT petition was circulated as an example of growing sentiment on this issue. So there's a direct link between your action and that outcome.
It took a long time to get there, but the bottom line, brothers and sisters, is he got there.
I got pulled in. They told me, hey, listen, Cenk, we're insiders. We are the establishment. People in Washington tell me that they're concerned about your tone. We think that there's a better role for you, and it's not in 6 o'clock. The problem with the mainstream media is they're desperate to get access. They don't challenge the government. They don't challenge power. We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
Components that corrupt our politicians, I think, also corrupt mainstream media. It's really difficult for cable outlets to talk about things like income inequality, wealth inequality, when the advertisers that are funding their shows are the same corporations that want to ensure that the same system continues. People watch digital media or new media, they get a completely different message. They focus on the issues that matter or resonate more with the constituency. We need to know one thing. Is the corporate media incompetent?
Corporate media, I can't hear you. Establishment press, where are you? I can't hear you. But the media's position I am clear on. Everything is pro-war, so everything is just framed that way. In this case, I mean, war is inevitable, right? I mean, the defense contractors should get a couple more $1 trillion. You ready for the stunning results? Only 6% of people say they have a great deal of confidence in the press. Wakey, wakey, okay? Progressives don't like the media either. You know why? It's the corporate media. Corporate media sounds like a conspiracy. Wait. Who owns you? Multi-billion-dollar corporations, public corporations. You have to do corporate media because corporations own us. Yeah, that's how it works. Every time you ring the bell below, there's a bell sound that goes off in Donald Trump's mind. Ring the bell.
TYT is thankful for all of the support we've received from our audience. I know that we're all living through a dark time. The economy is a mess, the two-party system is failing us, and the threat of climate change is growing. Cenk started this company in his apartment, and look where we are today. I've experienced what we can accomplish when we work together. So let's keep moving towards positive change. Join our movement at tyt.com/team.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the show. Anna Kasperi and John Iadarola with you. John, I'm heated. I'm ready to go.
I can tell. You're at least heated.
John is like a nice calming. It's funny because when Cenk's not here and I do the show with you, I feel like I take the Cenk mantle with like the rage, but I'm gonna calm it down. I do want to read one comment real quick from Alpha Dog, who says, I agree that the media should cover the Harris campaign fairly, including criticisms, but I do have concerns about mainstream media not calling out the absolute lunacy that is Trump. I don't know. Look, Cenk, I remember made this point back in 2020 and I snapped at him because we must be watching different media. I feel like all we get in the media is like Trump's a lunatic, Trump is crazy. Like, there's a lot of that. It's not working. So I like when they focus on the policies, focus on what Kamala Harris is gonna do differently, right? And that has been working for her. When she comes out with policy proposals, when she doesn't feed into the endless fighting about, oh, he called you this and he called you that. What do you have to say about it? Like, we want to know what the policies are. We want to know what you're going to do to make Americans' lives better. And yeah, the media does focus on Trump's lunacy. They do it all the time, all the time. What do you think?
No, I think they talk about it a lot. I mean, devil's advocate, there's a lot to talk about all the time. It's not like he gives you a 3-month span where, he hasn't said anything crazy. Like it doesn't happen. I think they do focus on it. I think it's a debate about whether it works or not, depending on what would qualify as works.
Yeah, I think to some extent it does, but I'm speaking from personal experience. Obviously, I don't represent everybody in the country, but after a while, you get desensitized to it when that's the only thing you see in the media.
Well, I agree. The only point I would quickly make is I think that's my fear about the way the media may cover this election is even those of us who constantly cover how crazy he is, I think we've been numbed. And so I think we would take maybe something that Harris or Walz say or do, and we might put it on a level that it doesn't deserve compared to Trump just because we're so used to all of his nonsense that it's like, I don't know, I guess it's just something crazy he said.
Yeah.
Whereas it may be crazier than anything she'll say in her entire life. But we want balance, we want to talk about different things. And so my fear would be she has a misstatement that if Donald Trump did it, you'd literally never hear of it because it's the 30th craziest thing he said that day. But it's the craziest thing she's said all week. So we talk about it?
Yeah, the thing is, like, I'm not seeing false equivalencies being carried out by the press.
I'm not really yet either.
Yeah.
I assumed they would come from that interview. I think the interview went very well. I think there was probably a brewing hunger in the media because they want to talk about something different. And then different narratives, like, oh my God, Harris is in turmoil now. Like that would be really exciting.
They do love the manufactured drama, don't they?
Yeah. But I agree. I don't think, for me, it's mostly a hypothetical thing. I don't think it's really happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I will concede that there was a time when the media would do this annoying thing with like having a creationist on to debate a climate scientist about whether or not climate change is real, right? Like that kind of like false equivalency would drive me nuts. But I really don't think that's what's happening with this election. Usually both candidates get covered separate from one another because right now, at least, you have Kamala Harris proposing things, and then you have Donald Trump saying crazy things. So they get covered, but in completely separate stories. The way Morning Joe talked about it, you would think that they would say, oh, Trump said this crazy thing, and then, but have you considered Kamala Harris's policies toward the Middle East? That's not what's happening.
And you also remember, because you were on some of these panels, they would have like the 10-person panels on CNN, 8 hours a day. And it's like, oh, well, we got to be fair. Let's have a Republican on. Oh, there's nobody reasonable, so I guess we'll have Scotty Nell Hughes and Jeffrey Lord or whatever. And so every panel had 30% bat-esque crazy. That isn't really happening, I don't think.
And look, the most important point that I'm trying to make is there is a desperate need for factual journalism that isn't trying to push one side or one party. Like we just need, like I need a source or sources that I can rely on to just give me the facts without any freaking spin. How am I supposed to do my job if I don't know the truth? You get what I'm saying?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Anyway.
In the break, I'm gonna tell you something that I almost did, but then decided it would be a bad idea. But anyway,
okay.
We'll talk.
Ooh, secrets. We'll talk about it later. All right, well, for now, let's actually get into some of the latest proposals coming out from the Kamala Harris campaign.
Now, I just want to press the point. When a political candidate comes up with what I think is a good idea, I have to call it a good idea. And a $50,000 tax cut for small, not tax cut, but a tax credit for startups or small businesses, coupled with less red tape. I gotta say, that is a good idea, regardless of our other tax ideas.
While that may be a good idea, it's hard to see how she's going to move forward with it.
Are the people of Fox Business commending Kamala Harris's recent proposals for small businesses? That's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. In fact, Kamala Harris has proposed a handful of new economic policies today, and clearly her effort in attempting to help entrepreneurs and small businesses is something that seems appealing to individuals who typically would be very critical of her and the Democratic Party. So look, the first wave of economic policies were the most populist ones. We've talked about them on the show. We've also talked about whether we believe she's actually going to fight for them or accomplish them. But she did have interesting proposals when it came to first-time homeowners or buyers, how to assist in helping them afford a home, how to increase the inventory of homes in the country, which we desperately need. But this announcement today was more targeted toward business owners. And we're not talking about major corporations. We're talking about efforts to help spur the development of more small businesses, which I think is an important effort to, I think that there's been a lot done to help incredibly profitable corporations, especially multinational corporations. I like the fact that she's actually putting out a proposal that would help small businesses, help people who want to start a small business actually do so. So here's what she said during an economic speech in New Hampshire earlier today.
I want to see 25 million new small business applications by the end of my first term. And to help achieve this, we will lower the cost of starting a new business. So here's the thing. On average, it costs about $40,000 to start a new business in America. That is a great financial barrier for a lot of folks, and it can hold entrepreneurs back. And the current tax deduction for a startup is just $5,000, okay? So then you gotta make up the delta there. Gotta figure out how you're gonna do that. Not everyone has access to that kind of wealth and capital. So part of my plan is we will expand the tax deduction for startups to $50,000. It's essentially a tax cut for starting a small business. Second, my plan will help existing small businesses grow. We will provide low and no interest loans to small businesses that want to expand. And we will, and this is very important, cut the red tape that can make starting and growing a small business more difficult than it needs to be.
Okay, so look, the details here matter, right? So when she talks about cutting red tape, what does that mean? What kind of red tape are we talking about? Obviously, we do not have details on that. So the vague statement about cutting red tape raises some red flags for me because I, again, would like her to elaborate on that a little further. But the tax deductions for small businesses, that's a pretty big deal because currently new small businesses, when they launch their startups, they can usually enjoy about $5,000 in tax deductions. She is proposing $50,000 in tax deductions. And so that's quite a bit of money, but look, we're talking about small businesses and the barrier to entry for small businesses is incredibly high, it's incredibly difficult. That's the reason why we have more and more concentration of these mega corporations. And so small businesses would be good for consumers as well because it gives you more options when it comes to goods and services. So I like that she is focusing on that. Whether or not the $50,000 tax deduction is a good proposal, I need to see more analysis on that. I have no idea, to be honest. But I should also note that Biden wanted to spur 19 million new businesses. She has upped the game by saying she'd like to spur 25 million new businesses. And again, a lot of her proposals are probably gonna receive some resistance in Congress. So it really depends on the makeup of Congress, whether or not she's gonna have majorities in the House and the Senate, which seems somewhat unlikely, to be honest with you. But I'm curious what you think, John, about what she's proposing here so far.
I'm glad you brought up that last point because the feasibility I want to return to. Yes. In the video that you played, there was a little bit about that. Yeah, some of these numbers are hard for a person who has never started a business, and I think many people probably watching can attest this to the really process. You're going from 5,000 to 50,000. That's obviously much bigger. How helpful actually is that to a new business? And when she says, I want to see 25 million new businesses, I mean, that's all fine and good. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. does that mean the proposals we're putting forward, we did an analysis and it's expected that it will spur the, like, I don't know. And then you hear the number 25 million new businesses and I think, are there 25 million businesses in America? That seems like an incredibly large amount of, like 1 in 10 people are gonna start a new business over the next 4 years. Or maybe it is that, they say like 50% of all new restaurants fail within 6 months. True. Maybe there's a lot of churn in that, I don't know. But some of it sounds good. In terms of the feasibility, I thought that clip you played with Stuart Varney and whatever that other guy is was interesting because like he was all jazzed because business or whatever. And then the other guy was like, well, that's all well and good, but how is she gonna get it done? Well, presumably legislation, and then you might counter, well, the Republicans wouldn't support it. Why?
I know, I mean,
it's a business tax cut.
Republicans purport to love small businesses, want to help support small businesses. They love tax cuts. So, I mean, it would be interesting to see how this would play out should Kamala Harris actually win and be able to move forward with these proposals. Like, I am curious to see how Republicans would behave. And look, it is not far-fetched that they would try to serve as an obstacle to passing this type of legislation, even if it's legislation that they would actually favor. I mean, that's what happened with the Senate bill on immigration. Trump told them to squash it because he wanted to run on immigration. They did it.
Yeah, it would be so counter to what they claim to support, although the immigration bill was similar. Yeah. Of course, we know in reality, 99 times out of 100 when they talk about small business, what they mean is massive corporations and maybe there's a few small businesses. That's what we're focusing on.
Right.
Whereas she seems to have a plan that specifically targets them, which that's good. Yeah, I don't know. Again, this isn't the sort of thing that I think tons of people are gonna grasp onto, but I could see it being helpful, like for a lot of people's interests. Like you were talking about, like, well, that really does seem like it'd be helpful. I think some people might look into it as a result of that. It's harder for me to assess how this will play nationally than like the suite of proposals she put out like 3 weeks ago about housing costs and things like that. I think this is targeted at a more niche audience, not super niche, but more niche.
Yeah. I am curious about how this will help her electorally as well, but also more interested in seeing analysis from economic experts on how this could potentially help or even hurt the American economy or businesses. Let's talk a little bit about how she would fund this, right? Because look, we're talking about tax cuts here, and we're already dealing with a big deficit issue. We're dealing with the Trump era tax cuts, which cost the federal government $2 trillion. So how is she gonna pay for this, right? Let's ask that question. The question that you'd hear from CNN if someone was proposing Medicare for all. How are you gonna pay for it? Well, she is apparently branding herself as fiscally disciplined, which is usually a Republican line, but let's tell you what she means here. Harris is expected to argue on the campaign trail that the revenue gained by rolling back certain provisions in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act should be used to fund community level investments and other programs that affect Americans in a more targeted way. Harris believes the federal government should use those expiring tax cuts to get at issues that affect the bottom line for the average American.
I would rather go to billionaires, but that sounds okay.
Yeah, but look, that is also a very vague statement. Like what does that mean? Okay, it should go toward, use those expiring tax cuts or the revenue that will be generated as a result of those tax cuts expiring. Use those on issues that affect the bottom line for the average American.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that obviously isn't just intended to explain how she's gonna fund this plan, but a lot of what she's going to be proposing, I guess. And they are big figures. I mean, you talked about how much the tax cuts originally cost, and I just saw an estimate earlier today that continuing those and expanding them in the variety of ways that Donald Trump has promised on the campaign trail is estimated over the next decade to cost over $10.5 trillion. So these are very large sums of money that could pay for a lot of stuff, theoretically.
The final thing that I want to get into just briefly is she has kind of backed off of the Biden proposal for taxing capital gains. So we've covered this before, but just in case you missed that coverage or are unfamiliar with what we're talking about when it comes to capital gains, we are not talking about unrealized gains here. There's been a discussion and debate about taxing unrealized gains. Put that aside, that's not what we're talking about. So Capital gains is when you're invested in something in the stock market and your investment has some returns, right? Your money's growing after you've invested in a company or a particular stock. When you cash out, you actually end up paying a far lower percentage in taxes for those capital gains. It's somewhere between 15 to 20%. So Biden wanted to tax capital gains at 39%. I say wanted because he proposed it but didn't do anything about it. So I have a hard time believing he actually wanted it. But he wanted to tax capital gains at 39%. Harris has come out with her proposal, and the top marginal tax rate for capital gains would be 28% under her proposal. So she's starting at a lower percentage. I think capital gains should just be taxed similar to income, right? So
income,
yeah, like let's stop playing this game. But the fact that she's coming in at a lower percentage to me signals that nothing will likely change when it comes to capital gains. But we'll see.
You mean you don't think that she'll do the 28%?
No.
I mean, if she did, I mean, that's theoretically almost a doubling of it. But
right.
Yeah, it's also possible to do absolutely nothing. And that, like, if you wanted to be the guy on the right of Stuart Varney being like, well, how are you gonna get it done? I think that's a more legitimate thing to talk about for raising capital gains, where the Republicans would fight to the death over that. That makes more sense there.
By the way, yes, I do believe Republicans would fight to the death over that.
Oh, and a lot of Democrats do, probably.
But well, remember, Nancy Pelosi beats the S&P 500 year after year.
Because she's that damn good.
She's so good. I mean, she should be working on Wall Street. She'd make a killing. Come on.
Instead, she's working for Wall Street, making a killing.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure all of those members of Congress who are trading individual stocks are not really interested in paying a higher percentage in taxes for their capital gains. Just there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I do.
All right, but since you want to talk about the actual possibility of passing these types of proposals, when we come back, we got a doozy of a story for you. An incredible report in Politico about how Republicans are actually crossing their fingers and hoping that Kamala Harris wins the presidential election rather than Donald Trump. We've got that and more coming up. Don't miss it. I just have to report that John's daughter is like the cutest baby ever.
She's adorable.
Okay, she's very cute. Very, very cute. I had the honor of meeting her over the weekend.
Nice. I'm glad you did.
She's awesome. Okay, anyway, Box writes in and says, I feel like pro-Russian voices should be allowed in the media. Box, I agree with you. Like, I don't have a problem with someone who has a genuine pro-Russian perspective in the press. The disinformation campaigns are a problem though, right? Like that I do have an issue with. The lack of transparency about where the funding is coming from, I have a problem with that too. As long as we're talking about honest reporting and someone who isn't engaged in some weird shady campaign, like I'm fine with that. Let's go to Bing Buddha, who says, I got the impression that Russian media was sus. What with the mass convictions of journalists there, in some cases 20-year sentences. Well, I wouldn't say that journalists in Russia are necessarily sus. It's the government that retaliates against them if they do actual journalism. But I hear what you're saying. All right, let's go over to Johnny, who says, thanks, which is one of my favorite comments. Thank you, I appreciate that. Another name says, American Prospect has a great article. By the way, I didn't know about this. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the American Prospect, and now I am not surprised that they have a headline like this. American Prospect has a great headline or article called Project 2025 and 1921 and 1973 and 1981. Like, the Heritage Foundation putting out documents like Project 2025 is not new. Like, this has been going on for a long time.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to focus on a part of it that's new, it's less the platform, and it's more about the institutional plan to cull a giant swath of the federal bureaucracy and replace it with mass trained ideologues. Yeah. That's more new.
Totally. I mean, look, every think tank is going to want to have influence over how the executive branch or members of Congress do their jobs, right? The question is, how susceptible is Donald Trump to just going along with Project 2025? And the reason why, honestly, from the beginning, I kind of didn't buy the narrative and the scare tactics from some on the left is because Donald Trump does not have like a monolith supporting him. There are some traditional Republicans, which are better represented by the Heritage Foundation. And then you have the America First MAGA crowd, which doesn't like the Heritage Foundation crowd.
But are there a lot of parts of Project 2025 that they would hate?
Yes. In fact,
proposals?
When the allegations first came out that Donald Trump was going to go along with Project 2025, I thought it was really interesting to see all of these like pro-Trump independent media people go after Trump and say, like, he better condemn it. Why do you think he condemned it? He didn't condemn it on our behalf. He condemned it because he didn't want his voters to turn on him. All right, we got to get back to the show. I've been a very naughty girl. I have been going too long in the segments, John. So we're gonna get right to our next story.
So I think I'll be taking over?
Okay, I mean, sure, you want to?
No, I'm good.
All right, let's get to our next story because I think this one is telling in how our government actually functions, right? So when you hear proposals from either side, think about what the politicians are really hoping for, and that's gridlock, so nothing gets done. So, while most national level Republicans have publicly been cheerleading Donald Trump, hoping that he wins the presidential election, Politico reports that behind the scenes, many of them are actually rooting for Kamala Harris. And honestly, this doesn't surprise me because I remember speaking at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce event. I was debating Ben Shapiro there. Publicly, outwardly, everyone loves Trump. Privately, the crap talking was pretty intense. Now, we're learning about this thanks to a column in Politico by Jonathan Martin titled, "If Republicans Want to Win, They Need Trump to Lose Big. To dominate the country once more, Republicans need to hasten the move to a post-Trump party." So in it, Martin argues that Harris is less a doctrinaire progressive than she is up for grabs on policy, but any liberal course she takes would be constrained by a GOP-held Senate. So that is what they're banking on. They're hoping that Republicans take control of the Senate. By the way, if Republicans have control of either chamber, that means we're gonna get gridlock. And so any proposal that might be too progressive for Republicans, they can just be obstructionists and prevent it from passage. And she would be the first Democrat to enter the presidency since 1884 without majorities in both chambers, should Republicans flip the Senate. That adds up to a recipe for gridlock and perhaps some deal making to fund the government and avoid across the board tax hikes, but not a Scandinavian social welfare state. God forbid.
Which she's definitely going to institute.
She hasn't even really proposed anything even close to that, but okay, yeah. So the idea here is, look, I think most people who have been paying attention know, like most Republican lawmakers do not like Trump and they feel like they have to support him publicly because of where the Republican electorate is. Like the Republican electorate loves Trump. Republicans in office don't necessarily love Trump. So if Kamala Harris wins, well then finally their Trump problem is gone.
Maybe.
Right, maybe. I mean, who knows? But they think he'll be gone. We'll have gridlock in Congress. And so we don't have to worry about Kamala Harris actually accomplishing anything. And then we can pave the way for a, in their minds, better Republican to run against Harris in the next election cycle.
Yeah, maybe. I think part of my initial knee-jerk opposition to the article was in the fight between what's not a terrible thesis that apparently, as you'll get to, many Republicans seem to agree with, and like the need to get people to click on it. When you want to have like a bold headline, they need him to lose and big, and then your entire thesis is lose, but the Republicans maintain control of, like, then no, you don't want him to lose big. You want her to win a little bit so that the Republicans still maintain control of the Senate and the House. Then that's not as exciting a premise, is it? But I get the idea. And I would just remind everyone, some people, especially if you're new to politics, might look at something like this and be like, well, why would you ever possibly want that? I mean, why would you not want to win? I mean, after all, like our team, if we win, we get what we want. Their team, if they win, they get what they want. But as you know from covering this for a long time, that's not really how it works. This is asymmetric warfare. Like our team, which I would define as not even the entire Democratic Party, has a lot of things that we want because we don't have them. The Republicans don't have a lot that they really need. They've gotten the tax cuts that they want. Things are set up pretty much the way they want. They can lose and they're doing okay because the status quo was already set by them. We need a big victory, but write that as the headline. Harris needs to win and big. We need the Senate, we need the House, we need to get people on the Supreme Court and all that. And also don't forget, hopefully flip some state legislatures as well.
So here's where things get super interesting with the Politico piece. So Martin thought that his piece, understandably, would be very provocative, but actually found that many Republicans agreed with him, and not just your run-of-the-mill like never Trumpers, right? He didn't like sit down with Kinzinger and base his entire piece on what Adam Kinzinger has to say. One high-level Republican conceding it may only be wishful thinking even floated the idea of a Harris victory, followed by Biden pardons of both his son, Hunter, and Donald Trump. This is like the magical thinking of the century, okay? That would take the issue of both cases off Harris's plate and, more to the point, drain the energy behind Trump's persecution complex so that Republicans can get on with the business of winning elections. I don't think these traditional conservative Republicans who secretly despise Donald Trump realize that like the electorate, like your voters like Trump. They like the brand of politics he brings to the Republican Party. Like they think that the second Trump is gone, all right, we're back to Bush era Republicanism. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be that, and I don't think it will be a replacement Trump that just naturally slots in there, because I don't think that exists. I think
agree,
that the last year has been very rough for that thesis. Ron DeSantis doesn't have it, JD Vance doesn't have it. Now, the good thing for them, if they're looking for a silver lining, is they may well, almost certainly, not get a person who gets all of the free passes and all of that Donald Trump gets, but whoever replaces him won't have so many of the downsides that make it so that like his base loves him, but that's a minority of the American population and he's never going to get the majority to like him. Another Republican might be a little bit more charismatic or not so horrendous in a lot of ways. And so I don't think the leadership of the Republican Party is going to be really happy with what comes. And I think that there's a lot of regular Republicans that initially are going to have a lot of whiplash after losing Donald Trump, assuming he doesn't run again, which he totally couldn't. I don't see why he wouldn't. But I think they might still end up better off electorally than with Donald Trump.
So some Republicans and GOP operatives actually fear a second Trump term could take the party in the wrong direction. For example, free market cheerleaders are fretting about Trump's new populist-infused policy platform that embraces tariffs and shies away from tough conversations about entitlements.
Tough conversations.
So like these are the kinds of Republicans we're talking about here. Okay, these are Republicans who are like, we want to cut Social Security and Medicare so bad, and this MFer is not committed enough to what we want to do. Okay.
He has talked about it during this campaign.
He has proposed it in budget proposals when he was in office. So, on one hand, he talks about how, no, we can't cut Social Security, but then behind the scenes, of course, he has his proposals to cut Social Security or raise the retirement age. Opponents of abortion rights are upset about his verbal flip-flops on abortion, an impromptu suggestion that the government should pay for in vitro fertilization treatments. What happened? I thought you guys wanted to increase the birth rate. What happened?
That would be a great way to do it. That would be a great way to do it. Also, by the way, has he said that again in the last week? No, he just spit out like a wild idea, has never said it again. I would be frustrated if I was a Republican, because how are you supposed to read this guy? He says wild things that are directly contradictory.
Defense hawks continue to worry about Trump abandoning US allies and upending the world order in a second term. So I want to be clear about something. I hate these people. Like, I hate what they represent. I hate what they stand for. I think they're cowards. I think, even though I disagree with Adam Kinzinger on politics, on policy, he definitely has way more courage than these pathetic little dweebs in Congress who secretly despise Donald Trump and everything he stands for, but they're too afraid to say anything about it publicly, and instead go to Jonathan Martin over at Politico to talk crap about Trump, right? You guys are pathetic, okay? I love how they're total hawks when it comes to foreign policy, but in real life, they're really chicken, you know what, okay?
I do.
Anyway, one conservative leader told Politico, quote, "There's a lot of anxiety about what Trump does to the Republican ability to win in 2028 and what he also may do to the party in terms of policy long term. There is just this concern that, like, okay, if the party just goes in that direction, then what kind of party is it? What kind of party is it going forward? And can conservatives then have a home going forward?" I mean, you got to take that up with the Republican voters, because the policies that Trump espouses are policies that seem to appeal to the very voters that you guys want to appeal to win in 2028. So how do you make amends with the fact that your base is now in a completely different headspace when it comes to policies and how they want this country to be run? I think it's a bigger question for them, but they're, maybe too scared to tackle it, because it seems like they're scared of everything.
It's definitely true.
Yeah.
If I could just say one thing to make them feel a little bit better. I know that obviously in that graphic, they're very focused, they have anxiety about 2028 or whatever. I don't think that they should be worried about 2028. They're getting way ahead of themselves. They should be worried about 2026, because you get that he's still gonna be choosing your Senate candidates in 2 years, right? Like, he's gonna choose another round of Dr. Oz's and Herschel Walker's and stuff like that. Again, the idea that he's just gonna go away, if he's not in office, all he has is fighting for relevancy to his base. He's gonna be doing rallies, and he's gonna be digging his claws into that base. You better hope that he loses and then, like, I don't know, has a run-in with a fish fillet or something like that that lays him out, because otherwise he's got control of the party for at least a few more years.
Very true. All right, well, we got to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the campus protests that have been taking place on the Columbia University campus and more. Don't miss it. We'll be right back. Hey, you know what I just realized? We need that. Zebra writes in our member section and says, the truth is enough when it comes to Trump. Let him be the one gaslighting the public. Zebra, that's exactly right. I don't think you have to make anything up. I think you could just focus on what he's done and what he's proposing. Patty Wax says, Anna, I hear that you want Harris to talk about policy. Does Trump talk about policy? No, there is a double standard there. Yeah, then talk about the fact that one party is putting out policies, the other is not. That is accurate. I'm saying do accurate reporting. Okay, don't cheerlead. If you're a journalist, if you're a commentator, that's different. But if you are tasked with doing journalism, you are not supposed to be a cheerleader for one side or the other. That's the way it's supposed to work. All right, let's go to, you know what? Let's go to our Twitch community. Oh, Brett Ehrlich has entered the chat. Should we read his comment?
Brace yourself.
The key thing here is many real humans in non-big cities run their own small businesses, and it's a way to be pro-business and give mom and pop a chance against these huge businesses. I know that's kind of what we said. Small business messaging is a huge foothold in exurban areas electorally. For a huge swath of the country, America isn't get a job that puts food on the table. It's start a business and grow it and have something to pass on to your kids while also creating jobs for others. Yeah, small businesses are good. I like that she's focusing on small businesses.
I don't like them.
Yeah, I just like
they should be bigger.
The point that I'm trying to make is I don't know how effective those policies are. Like I don't have enough expertise to weigh in on whether or not those tax deductions for people starting small businesses is gonna be enough to help them.
The interest-free loan sounds good.
Yeah.
There's a few things. There's not a ton, but there's a few things.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing her for it. It's just, I'm curious to see how it plays out. All right, let's go to Doc Wagon OG, who says, I feel that for the last 8+ years, the media has been covering Trump and occasionally highlighting the absurd things he says. It's only recently that they have seriously called him out on it consistently, rather than treat all of his lunacy as an occasional one-off. Again, man, I don't know what media we're consuming. Like we're consuming totally different media.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but okay. Diversify your sources, because trust me, there's a lot of coverage of Trump and how crazy he is. Lots of stuff about the scary things he says, the scary things he wants to do. Yeah. Occam's
you
taser.
Watch TDR. We do it from time to time.
Yeah, I mean,
come over here.
So Occam's taser says, I love this comment so much. Occam's taser says, Vinny loses his cool way more than Cenk does on the Piers Morgan show. I disagree with you. I think they both lose their cool similarly. Okay, they both look like they're gonna have a heart attack. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it real. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian, John Idarola with you. So there have been some protests on college campuses. School is in session. Columbia University, we have a story prepared for that. But we're gonna cover that tomorrow because that story will continue developing. I actually wanted to talk about something a little different in this segment, having to do with what corporations are doing with their tax savings. And I think it's important to know about this, because it's not investing in you, it's not investing in their businesses or their employees. They're investing in their own pay packages. So let's get into it. A new devastating report from the Institute for Policy Studies has found that megacorporations and companies are spending the least, or the ones that are spending the least on their employees, are basically dedicating hundreds of billions of dollars to corporate stock buybacks. Now, those corporate stock buybacks not only artificially inflate the value of the stock, it also inflates the pay packages that the corporate executives get, because yes, they get paid a salary, but usually their salary is small compared to how much they get paid in stock options. And if those stocks happen to be worth a lot more, well, then all of a sudden they're giving themselves a sweet little raise if they're doing it through corporate stock buybacks. Now, the report, which is titled Executive Excess 2024, profiled the low wage 100. These are the corporations that pay the lowest wages for their workers. And they specifically, of course, look at 100 companies that pay the lowest median wages of the S&P 500. And here's what they found. From 2019 through 2023, the low wage 100 spent $522 billion. That's over $500 billion on stock buybacks. Lowe's is the company that really stands out here, okay? They actually spent the most on buybacks based on this analysis. Lowe's spent $42.6 billion on buying back its own shares, a sum large enough to have given each of the firm's 285,000 global employees an annual $29,865 bonus for 5 years. In 2023, Lowe's CEO Marvin Ellison enjoyed total compensation of $18.2 million. The retailer's median annual worker pay, a mere $32,626. So not only does that give you a sense of how much Lowe's is spending on corporate stock buybacks, but it also shows you that disparity in pay for the, by the way, the CEO should get paid more. No one's saying the CEO shouldn't get paid more. But the idea that the CEO should take home $18.2 million while the median worker gets paid just $32,600 is insane. That is insane. In fact, these companies are also handing out, the median annual worker pay of the low wage 100 was $34,522, okay? So just overall, these people are just underpaying their workers while paying their executives a ton of money, and that money is partly, it's tied to the stock market, and when they do the corporate stock buybacks, the amount of money they get paid as a result of those shares being inflated increases. Yeah, so
yeah,
go ahead.
100%. I mean, look, so I've been very critical of CEO pay in the past. The argument is that you pay them more because they are better and smarter than all of us dumb, dirty peasants. And I largely accept that. They come up with great ideas, like taking a whole bunch of money and just throwing it into stock buybacks. I mean, who else would have thought of that if not a genius? And my favorite part about this isn't just the huge sums of money that are being thrown around. My favorite part about the report is when the huge sums of money are being thrown around. It's from 2019 to 2023, during like the pandemic, when everything's so tough on businesses. We have no money. We have to raise prices. It's so hard.
That is such
Meanwhile,
a good point.
we have so much money. I literally don't even know what we should spend it on. I guess myself. I guess I'll spend it on myself, I suppose. That's just, it is such an indictment of everything about our business culture.
I love the video right now that's supposed to depict corporate CEOs enjoying a glass of wine, maybe some scotch.
What's up with that guy's collar? I don't know what that is, but I'm sure that shirt costs $750.
You wouldn't understand as one of the poorest, John.
I wouldn't understand. I got this at Macy's, so you're dead on.
So I had mentioned that, Marvin Ellison, who's the CEO for Lowe's, enjoys a total compensation package of $18.2 million, while the median annual worker gets paid just $32,600. I just want you to compare that disparity to what the disparity was not too long ago. So the average CEO worker pay ratio at low wage 100 firms narrowed from 603 to 1 in 2022 to 538 to 1 in 2023, but median pay levels remain extremely low. The average ratio among large US corporations stood at just 25 to 1 in 1965.
They weren't geniuses yet.
They weren't geniuses yet, that's
weren't
true.
geniuses.
They hadn't figured out, or maybe there were laws that actually prevented the corporate stock buybacks from happening.
It's more the genius thing. They've just become so much smarter these days.
So much smarter.
Great
By the way,
ideas.
Look, a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is when, like, the left does tend to kind of undervalue the hellish nature of being a CEO. Like, don't get mad at me, but like, I can't help but think of Cenk. Like, I would rather do anything. I'd rather have every single tooth pulled out of my mouth with no anesthesia at all than do Cenk's job, okay? It seems like absolute hell. He's constantly in like business meetings, business calls, meetings in general. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but have you been in meetings all day, every day for work? Oh, no, okay? Like running a business is not easy. So like I don't wanna underplay what they have to do, but the idea that the pay disparity, that pay gap should be as large as it is a joke.
I know, it's absolutely ridiculous. I'm glad that it's one of the things that Bernie Sanders has often returned to, because I think a lot of people, everything seems so abstract about this, but when you put it in direct, like 400 to 1 terms, I think most people understand that the CEO is not worth 400 of them.
Yeah, no, I totally
Even
agree.
in America, where we're trained to worship and deify the rich.
All right, I want to read some comments before we wrap up the main show. And by the way, we're going to have an awesome members-only post-game or bonus episode, so stick around for that. Jesse Waters has some thoughts about the masculinity of Tim Walz, and I want to discuss that. I have a lot to say about that. So tyt.com/join to become a member, or hit that join button. You can become a member that way on YouTube. All right, let's go to our Twitch community. So C Prince Reborn Dragons, who subscribed at tier 1, says, using my subversary to say I'm at work and was about to leave because the power went out, but as we were walking out, the power went back on. FML.
That
I think you
sucks.
should leave anyway.
That sucks.
You should just leave anyway. I know, right? Oh, the power's out, everybody go home. And then as you're walking out, power's back on.
I know.
Ugh.
That's like that waiting to find out if your school is on the list of snowed out ones or whatever.
I've never experienced that because I'm a native to Southern California.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Also, I doubt kids are like around a radio waiting to hear it anymore. It's like they get a text message, they don't have to come to school. You guys don't even know what you're missing out on.
Green New Dealer Dragon says, I demand that the old stream media add a live chat to their broadcasts. Oh, they would not like that. They would not live.
Oh, that would be fascinating.
That would be fascinating. They would be shook. The host would definitely be shook. Like, oh my God, we're getting judged in real time. We're getting feedback in real time.
That is a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
I'm gonna think about that for a bit. We should give that person a Blue Apron gift card.
Eeyore Fedora says, always in for an Anna Solo. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I hope all of you enjoyed today's show. And if you're a member, stick around. We have our bonus episode coming up. If you're not, tyt.com/join. We'll see you there.